A British Columbia couple found guilty of assault for spanking their 14-year-old daughter will not serve any jail time. The parents admitted to hitting the teen with a plastic hockey stick and a skipping rope after finding out she had shared nude photos of herself on Snapchat. Joining us now to talk about the legalities of spanking in Canada is family and children's rights lawyer John Schuman. And so many questions on this one, John, so it's good to have you here. First and foremost is, how does the law define spanking? Because skipping rope.
Well, there's no definition of spanking per se. It's an assault, and the Canadian Criminal Code gives a defense against hitting kids, because that's what assault is, if you're using it to correct them. So it gives a bit of an exception for corporal punishment, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a spank. It could be a slap or a hit, but it's all that is protected right now under the Criminal Code with limitations. With
limitations, and they have to do with reasonable force. So how do you define reasonable force?
Well, the Supreme Court gave us a lot of direction in this case a few years ago, and it said reasonable force is not something that causes like serious harm or harm, and you should not be using implements like this couple did to their child. So that's where they obviously fell out of the line. It also fell out because there's an age range when you're not supposed to hit kids, because there's no point in hitting a kid over under 2 years of age, and over 14, the Supreme Court felt it would only engender antisocial behavior or violent behavior if you hit a teenager. So those are the parameters for when you're allowed to hit a kid.
Religion factors into this as well. The parents said, they looked at their religion and said they're meant to strike with a rod, not with the hands, because hands are an instrument of love, which is why they picked up something else. How does that work into the law and the legalities around this? Well,
the law says no hitting with things, and there is a right of religious freedom in Canada, but our rights under the Charter of Rights are limited by what reasonable limitations to our rights. And the Supreme Court said that this is a reasonable limitation, that you shouldn't be hitting kids with things because it causes more harm, and there's greater danger, and it sends the wrong message to children.
Speaking of message, does the decision here make sense to you?
I think it makes a lot of sense to me. It's definitely consistent with the law as I understood it. I mean, this was a child who was a teenager, so that was sort of out. And the judge said this was more punitive than corrective. It wasn't sort of to teach the child a lesson as much as it was to punish. And the defense is correction of a child by force. So correcting them, not punishing them as much. So, and it was also the hitting left some permanent marks. Apparently it was a week or so that these bruises stayed on her buttocks. So clearly they had gone beyond what would be considered a reasonable amount of correction of a child.
The bruises were so bad that her friends noticed. They alerted teachers or staff at her school, and in turn the RCMP was called in.
That's right. So obviously her friends were very concerned, and it wasn't a trivial correction. It wasn't like suddenly grabbing a kid and trying to protect them from getting hit by a car, or an offhand, sort of slap, or just a sort of not thinking about it type incident. It was clearly quite a severe hit by both parents, I guess, separately.
The mother and then the father.
The mother and the
father
mother.
Rather than the mother following up. Thank you, John, for coming in.
Oh, it was great to be here. Thanks.